She shrugged. Were expensive. When? Sharon asked. 2007. Been cleaning since 2019. The numbers hit like punches. 15 years since she'd saved Sharon's life. 18 years since she'd been pushed out of nursing. 5 years scrubbing floors. And nobody had noticed. Nobody had cared. Until now. Sharon stepped forward, stunned. Her designer handbag slipped from her shoulder and hit the marble floor. She didn't notice. Didn't care. Emotion flooded her face. Not the practiced emotion of television appearances or red carpet moments. This was raw, unfiltered. The kind of feeling that cracks you wide open in public, and you can't stop it even if you wanted to. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smudging her carefully applied makeup. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, the kind that comes right before you completely break down. You? She started, but her voice failed her. She tried again. You were there. You were there when I... She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Without hesitation, she embraced the woman who once stood between her and death. Not a polite hug. Not the air kiss half-squeeze thing that happens at industry parties. A real embrace. Sharon wrapped her arms around Margaret and held on like she was drowning. Like this woman was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Margaret stiffened for just a second, surprised, overwhelmed, then melted into it. Her own tears came then, quiet. The tears of someone who'd learned to cry silently so nobody noticed. I thought about you so many times. Sharon said into Margaret's shoulder, her voice muffled and breaking. I wanted to find you. To thank you properly. But I didn't know your last name.
Didn't know, Margaret. It's okay,
Margaret whispered. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. They stood there, holding each other, while the pristine art gallery transformed around them into something more important than culture or commerce. Into something human. Visitors nearby paused, sensing something deeply human unfolding. Conversations died mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. People turned, drawn by the magnetic pull of genuine emotion in a space designed for detached appreciation. At first, they looked with curiosity. The way you look at a scene in a movie, wondering what's happening. Then recognition rippled through the crowd. That's Ozzy Osbourne. And Sharon. Why is she hugging the cleaning lady? But as people watched, really watched, something shifted. The cynicism fell away. The social armor cracked. Because what they were seeing wasn't a publicity stunt. Wasn't manufactured for cameras or clout. It was real. A woman who'd survived cancer embracing the woman who'd helped save her life. A rock star couple standing in an upscale gallery, crying with a cleaner. Not celebrity, not status, just gratitude, pure. Overwhelming. Impossible to fake. A young woman in the back started crying. She didn't know why, exactly. Just that watching this broke something open inside her. An older man blinked hard, suddenly thinking about the home care nurse who'd tended to his father during hospice. He'd never properly thanked her. Never even got her full name. A collector in an expensive suit felt something uncomfortably close to shame. Because an hour ago, he'd nearly knocked into this same woman's cleaning cart and hadn't said a word. Hadn't acknowledged her existence. And now he was watching Sharon Osbourne, sobbing in her arms. The gallery owner stood frozen near the entrance, completely unsure what to do. This wasn't in any protocol. Guests weren't supposed to interact with staff. Especially not like this, but somehow stopping it felt wrong. Ozzy stood beside the two women, one hand covering his mouth, tears running freely down his face. He wasn't embarrassed. Wasn't trying to hide it. This wasn't the tough guy who'd shocked the world with wild antics. This was just a man who understood what it meant to be saved. Sharon finally pulled back, keeping her hands on Margaret's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. You will never clean another floor, she said, her voice fierce through the tears. Do you hear me? Never again. Margaret tried to protest. Ms. Osbourne, Sharon. Call me Sharon. And I'm serious. Yes, you do. We all do. Sharon's voice cracked again. The world needs people like you to be doing what you're meant to do. Not this. She gestured at the cleaning cart with something close to anger. Not anger at Margaret. Anger at a system that throws away its best people. That values art over the artists of mercy. That forgets the hands that hold us together. The former nurse explained she had left healthcare after burnout and family hardships. Her voice was steady, the same steadiness that had carried Sharon through crisis. But there was weight behind it now. Years of weight, after they let me go from the hospital. Margaret said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I tried to find another nursing position, applied everywhere, NHS facilities across London, private clinics, care homes. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But I was 52, overqualified for entry positions, too expensive for senior roles, and there were younger nurses willing to work for less. The math wasn't complicated. Sharon's face hardened. Ozzy's jaw clenched, so I did agency care work for a while, Margaret continued. Home visits mostly. Helping elderly patients with daily tasks. Medication management, wound care, it was good work. Meaningful work. What happened? Ozzy asked quietly. Margaret's expression shifted. Something painful crossed her face. My husband got sick, dementia. Early onset, he was only 59. Her voice caught. Cruel disease. He went from running his own plumbing business to not recognizing me in 18 months. Sharon's hand flew to her chest. I became his full-time carer. Had to. Couldn't afford proper care facilities. And even if I could, she shook her head. I wasn't putting him in a home. Not after 33 years of marriage. How long? Sharon whispered. 4 years. He passed in 2018. The gallery had gone completely silent now. 20 people standing frozen, eavesdropping without shame. Because this was more real than anything hanging on the walls. The care work dried up during that time. Margaret went on. Couldn't commit to shifts when I didn't know if he'd have a bad day. Agencies want reliability. Can't blame them. She glanced at her cleaning cart almost apologetically. By the time he was gone, I'd been out of nursing for over a decade. Too big a gap, no recent references, and honestly, her voice dropped. I was exhausted, burned out in a way I didn't know was possible. Life had shifted, not gradually, not fairly, just shifted. The way it does when you're too busy surviving to notice until, suddenly you're somewhere you never imagined you'd be. Bills needed paying. Mortgage on a small flat in Croydon, council tax, utilities, food. Her husband's medical expenses had eaten through their savings. The funeral costs took what was left. She'd applied for jobs, retail, reception, administration, anything with regular hours and predictable pay, but the market was flooded. 20 applicants for every position, and she was competing with people half her age who didn't have decade-long gaps in their CVs. She found work wherever she could, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a supermarket, seasonal work at a department store during Christmas, jobs that made her invisible, jobs that paid just enough to keep the lights on, but never enough to get ahead, jobs where nobody asked her name or cared that she'd once held someone's heart steady during a code blue, including here. The gallery contract had been a lucky break, she explained. Better pay than most cleaning gigs, daytime hours, relatively easy work. She'd been doing it for 8 months, cleaning floors beneath priceless art, scrubbing marble while people discussed investments worth more than she'd earn in 5 years, emptying bins filled with champagne bottles and canapé plates while her own dinner most nights was toast and tea. Unknown to the world she once saved. Nobody here knew she'd worked in critical care. Nobody knew she'd held the hands of dying patients and talked them through their fear. Nobody knew she'd spent nights studying medical journals to stay current, or that she'd once been offered a position training new nurses because her skills were so respected. They just saw the uniform, saw the cart, saw someone whose job was to be invisible, and Margaret had made peace with that. Or told herself she had, because you don't get to be proud when you're just trying to survive. You take the work that's available. You keep your head down. You don't complain. You definitely don't tell people you used to save lives. What's the point? It doesn't change anything, doesn't pay the bills, doesn't make you matter more. You're a cleaner now. That's all anyone sees. That's all anyone needs to see, until today. Until 2 people she'd helped 20 years ago walked into this gallery and remembered. And suddenly, for the first time in years, Margaret felt seen. Ozzy shook his head slowly, not in disbelief anymore. In something else. Something that looked like anger and heartbreak mixed together. He stepped closer to Margaret, his voice rough with emotion. You were an angel to us, he said, not metaphorically. Not as some flowery compliment. He meant it literally. That night, his voice cracked. He stopped, gathered himself, tried again. That night when Sharon's fever spiked and the alarms were going off and I genuinely thought I was going to lose her. Sharon reached for his hand. Squeezed it. You were the one who stayed calm, Ozzy continued. You were the one who made me believe she'd make it through. Not the doctors with their degrees and their fancy titles. You? Margaret's eyes filled again. I was just doing my job. No. Ozzy's voice was firm. You were doing more than your job. Way more. He looked around the gallery at the expensive art, The wealthy collectors, the pristine space that suddenly felt obscene. No one who saves a life should feel invisible. The words hung in the air, simple, undeniable, devastating in their truth. Because how many people like Margaret were out there right now? How many nurses, caregivers, cleaners, care workers, people who'd given everything to help others, were struggling in silence while society looked right through them? Sharon was nodding, tears still streaming. He's right. This is wrong. This is so wrong, Mrs. Osbourne. Sharon, she insisted again, almost fiercely. And we're going to fix this. Margaret looked uncomfortable now. Not ungrateful, just conditioned by years of hardship not to accept help. Not to be a burden. Not to expect anything. I appreciate the sentiment, really, but I'm fine. I manage. You shouldn't have to just manage. Ozzy interrupted. His voice had that stubborn edge anyone who knew him would recognize. The edge that said he'd made up his mind, and there was no talking him out of it. He insisted on thanking her properly, not with fame, but with dignity, respect, and help. What do you need? He asked directly. And don't say nothing. Don't be polite. I'm serious. What do you actually need? Margaret hesitated. Decades of pride warring with decades of exhaustion. She swallowed hard. I don't even know anymore. Do you want to go back to nursing? Sharon asked gently. Margaret's face crumpled slightly. Like the question had touched something she'd buried deep. I don't know if I can, she admitted. It's been so long. The field has changed. New protocols, new technology. I'd need retraining, recertification. So we'll pay for it, Ozzy said immediately. All of it. Whatever you need.
I can't ask you to.
You're not asking. We're offering. There's a difference. Sharon stepped closer. Margaret, listen to me. You gave me time. Time with my husband, time with my children, time to watch them grow up. Do you understand what that's worth? Her voice broke. I got to see my kids graduate. Get married. I have grandchildren now because of you. Because you didn't give up on me when things got bad. Ozzy nodded, his own voice thick. You don't get to brush that off. You don't get to pretend it doesn't matter. Margaret was openly crying now. Not the quiet, invisible tears from before. Real sobs that shook her shoulders. I don't know what to say. She whispered. Say yes. Sharon said simply. Say yes to letting us help you, please. There was a long moment where Margaret just stood there, caught between her pride and her exhaustion, between the person she used to be and the person life had forced her to become. Then, finally, she nodded. Just a small movement. But it meant everything. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. Ozzy exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. Sharon pulled Margaret into another embrace, and around them, the gallery full of strangers watched something that would stay with them far longer than any painting. Two people who'd made it to the top refusing to forget the person who'd helped them survive. Not for cameras, not for press, just because it was right. Because some debts aren't about money. They're about recognizing the worth of a human being and making sure the world sees it too. The gallery faded into the background. The expensive paintings, the track lighting, the abstract sculptures worth 6 figures. None of it mattered anymore. The space had transformed into something bigger than art, bigger than culture, bigger than the careful curation of taste and wealth. It had become a place where 3 lives intersected across time. 3 people stood in a quiet circle of shared history. Ozzy, Sharon, Margaret, rock royalty and a former nurse-turned-cleaner. In any other context, their paths would never cross. Different realities. Different sides of the same brutal economic divide. But here they were, connected by the most fundamental thing humans can share: survival. Tears, gratitude, recognition, not performed for the watching crowd, though everyone was still watching. Phones out now, recording, capturing this moment that would be all over social media within the hour. But the 3 of them weren't thinking about that. Sharon held Margaret's hand like she might vanish if she let go. Ozzy kept shaking his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his leather jacket sleeve, muttering things that sounded like prayers or curses or both. Margaret just stood there, overwhelmed, like someone had pulled her out of deep water, and she was remembering how to breathe. For 20 years, she'd carried this quiet knowledge, that she'd helped save someone's life, that she'd made a difference, that she'd mattered. But life had steadily convinced her otherwise. Every rejection letter, every bill she couldn't quite pay, every time someone looked through her like she didn't exist. The world had a way of telling you that what you'd done didn't count, that who you'd been didn't matter, that you were only worth what someone would currently pay you. and she'd almost believed it, almost. Until now, a reminder that the people who change our lives often disappear back into ordinary worlds. They don't get statues, don't get awards, don't get remembered in history books or thanked at ceremonies. They clock in, clock out, do their jobs, go home to empty flats and quiet lives. The nurses who hold your hand during chemo, the caregivers who bathe your aging parents with gentleness, the cleaners who scrub away the evidence of human messiness without complaint. They save us, sustain us, keep the world functioning. Then they vanish, back into uniforms and invisibility, back to being taken for granted, until very rarely someone remembers. Someone sees them. Someone says you mattered. You matter. And for just a moment, the cruelty of the world cracks open, and something human breaks through. We walk past heroes every day. Not the kind in movies. Not the ones with capes or costumes or dramatic theme music. Real heroes, the quiet kind. They serve, heal, protect, and sacrifice. The nurse who stays 3 hours past her shift because a patient is scared and alone. The teacher who spends her own money on supplies because the school won't. The caregiver who changes adult diapers with dignity and kindness when family members can't face it. The paramedic who holds a stranger's hand in an ambulance and promises them they're not going to die. The social worker who fights through bureaucracy to save kids from situations most people can't imagine. They show up, do the work, make the difference, then return to lives where no one knows their story. They go home to small apartments and tight budgets. They eat simple meals. They worry about their own bills, their own problems, their own exhaustion. They don't get profiled in magazines, don't get invited to fancy events, don't get thanked by strangers or recognized on the street. The world takes what they give and then forgets they exist. Until someone remembers. Until someone says, wait, I know you. You saved me. Until someone looks past the uniform or the job title and sees the person underneath. The person who chose compassion when they could have chosen indifference. The person who gave more than their paycheck required. The person who treated strangers like they mattered. That's what happened in that London gallery. Not a publicity stunt. Not a celebrity doing charity for cameras. Just recognition. Just two people refusing to let someone who'd changed their lives disappear back into invisibility. Just a reminder that the people cleaning our floors, serving our food, caring for our sick, they're not background extras in our story. They're the main characters in their own. And sometimes, they're the heroes in ours. Because sometimes, the person mopping the floor is the reason your world never fell apart. Think about that for a second. Really think about it. The woman pushing a cleaning cart past you in the hospital corridor. She might have talked someone through the worst night of their life. The man emptying trash bins in your office building. He might have served 2 tours overseas and saved his entire unit. The person restocking shelves at the supermarket at 6 a.m. She might have a PhD and 3 decades of teaching experience before the funding cuts came. We don't know their stories, we don't ask. We just see the job, the uniform, the role society's assigned them, and we walk right past. But Margaret wasn't just a cleaner. She was a critical care nurse who'd saved lives, who'd held dying patients and made them feel less alone, who'd worked double shifts during flu seasons because her colleagues were overwhelmed, who'd given everything to a system that eventually threw her away. And when Ozzy and Sharon walked into that gallery, they could have done what everyone else did, looked right through her, stepped around her cart, continued their day without a second thought. But they didn't. They saw her, they remembered, and they refused to let her story end with invisibility. And heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they do, nurses, firefighters, paramedics, soldiers, but sometimes heroes wear aprons, wear hairnets, wear cleaning gloves and comfortable shoes. Sometimes they're serving your coffee, driving your Uber, answering phones at customer service centers, stocking shelves, delivering packages, wiping down tables. Sometimes they wear name tags, not badges, not awards or accolades or any recognition at all, just name tags. A first name printed on cheap plastic pinned to a polyester uniform. That's all the world gives them. But underneath that name tag is a person with a history, with dreams they've had to defer, with sacrifices they've made, with people they've helped and lives they've touched and moments that mattered, even though nobody was watching. Margaret saved Sharon Osbourne's life. Then she cleaned floors for 5 years, and nobody knew, nobody cared, until someone looked twice. So maybe, just maybe, we should all look twice. at the people we pass every single day, at the hands that serve us, help us, make our lives function, at the humans behind the roles we take for granted. Because you never know. The person mopping your office floor tonight might be the person who once saved someone's world. And heroes don't stop being heroes just because the world stopped noticing. They're still there, still showing up, still mattering, even when no one's looking, especially when no one's looking.